seriously, just stop shaking the tambourine. This video is going to be about how there's so much more that you can do with the tambourine if you know the vocabulary. And we're going to kind of use this Digdown video for context, which I recorded a tambourine track for, you know, what I would have done had I played tambourine on the track. So here's some of that. Right, so essentially what we're talking about is that style of tambourine playing, which I was exposed to in New Orleans as part of the brass band scene, but I mean it's in kind of all dance music down there, whether you're talking about, you know, R&B or funk or gospel music. And this type of tambourine playing comes from gospel music, or more specifically comes from the black church. And I think that's one reason a lot of people, and let's be honest, mostly talking about white people, don't know anything about this style of tambourine playing, because unless you grew up going to church in the South, unless you grew up in New Orleans playing this music, you probably just don't know about it. And it's such a more dynamic way to have the tambourine be an interesting voice in the groove, almost functioning as like a second snare drum. It's also worth noting that this style of tambourine playing has a big place in Mardi Gras Indian culture, which is exclusive to New Orleans but isn't talked about around the country a lot. And these types of rhythms are pretty central to that. And if you're completely unfamiliar with that culture, you actually have probably heard the branches of it. If you've ever heard like a song like Iko Iko, there's so many of these tunes that became New Orleans R&B funk standards. They have their roots in Mardi Gras Indian culture too. So that's something totally worth checking out, because there was both these things happening at the same time, right? This style of tambourine playing was happening in the church, and it was also happening in Mardi Gras Indian culture, and it's still happening today. Like, all this culture isn't antiquated or dead. I mean, this is very much alive. So in addition to just through New Orleans music and through gospel music, this type of tambourine playing was, or did exist on kind of more popular recordings for a while, but it was really mostly Motown recordings. And you have players like Sandra Crouch and Norman Whitfield and all these people on all these amazing Motown recordings. But a lot of those people were also, you know, songwriters and musicians and producers of their own right. They just happen to also play tambourine, which is something that is fairly common. And some of the, you know, best tambourine playing I've ever seen is being in New Orleans and you're at a gig and all of a sudden the, you know, trumpet player just picks up the tambourine and is killing. It's just an instrument that people learn to play and people can play. So the giant disclaimer that I also have to offer is that tambourine, probably more than any other instrument, has an incredible amount of variation in the exact technique for how it's played. Part of that is because there's not like this formal training or this school, or, you know, none of this stuff is institutionalized. The point is to kind of do what you do to get those sounds, to get that dynamic groove happening, to get all these different ways to make the groove pop. And this is the way that I kind of approached it, and from paying attention to what's going on in New Orleans and seeing a bunch of people do this across all kinds of music, it's basically the technique I developed to do it, and just going to break down how that works. Okay, so first things first, the tambourine itself. Number one, get yourself a tambourine that is cheap. Get yourself a crappy tambourine, because you are going to beat the hell out of it. I use this little 10-inch Remo plastic head, you know, double jingle tambourine, and I love these. I love these tambourines. There's no reason to have a tambourine that is expensive, right? I mean, it's something that you're going to beat on. And so the head is really important though, because we're going to use the head more like a drum. Sometimes we're going to be getting, you know, smacks out of the head. That's going to be the biggest accents. And then other times we're kind of hitting the frame and hitting the head to get our timekeeping stuff. And you'll notice on my tambourine head, I've got some duct tape. The duct tape is helpful because it muffles that head a little bit, keeps it from breaking as much when you're pounding on it. And it also offers a little bit of texture and friction, because we're going to do a bunch of stuff where we're kind of trying to catch the hand on the tambourine as we play it. And that little bit of friction tends to help. So yeah, let's get into it. All right, so the basic technique we're talking about, we don't even need the tambourine for this. Basic technique we're talking about is everything that's a downbeat, like 1 and 2 and 3 and, all those are going to be downward motions, like that. Like this is my tambourine hand. I'm going down, right? And then anything that's an upbeat, that's going to be the upward motion. And you may have even seen people kind of clap like this, right? If you paid attention to gospel music at all. It's that motion. Basically, when one hand turns, the other hand turns opposite, and we're essentially doing this, right? So you can practice this motion just by going back and forth here, right? And you can even, you know, just get faster and faster. So the first rhythm that we're going to talk about is something that kind of tends to work all the time in any of these brass band grooves, but like any dance music really that's got upbeat grooves or even downbeat grooves. Because what we're going to try to do is approach the tambourine as though it's a second snare drum. It can be in conversation with whatever high drum is in the mix. If the snare's on 2 and 4, or if the snare's on the end of 2 and the end of 4, the tambourine can function as playing notes that fit in the spaces of those accents. So kind of filling out the groove more and giving it more linear conversation as you go through the phrase. The first one of those patterns that kind of always works is playing a accent on the end of 1, and then playing straight notes, like straight timekeeping notes after the end of 1, and then just repeating that 2-beat pattern. So the pattern that we're talking about is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, 3, 2. Right? Pretty simple. So the way that you need to kind of learn how to play it on a tambourine is first getting comfortable with how to make those notes, right? Like this is my downward note. That's my downbeat. This is my upward note. That's my upbeat. Now, first you're going to want to spend some time just getting used to being able to go do those back and forth. So maybe you're going to start kind of slow. Right? Once you get comfortable with that, speed it up a little. And you'll notice that like this hand for me is moving a lot. This is just basically turning and getting hit. And there's a ton of different techniques for what this hand actually looks like. It doesn't matter if you're holding the tambourine in the left or the right, whatever's comfortable for you. Some people use more of a fist. You can get a really big pop out of the head with the fist. I keep my hand open and I hit it with kind of the fatty stuff at the bottom of my palm and my wrist. That feels good to me because then I don't need to change my hand shape when I play a big slap and I kind of catch the entire head with a slap. But people will play all over their body essentially. Maybe it's like the hand, the elbow, the hip, the knee, the foot. Not playing on my foot because I got these 6 Stan Smiths. Anyway, I'm psyched about those. This is just my hand technique, right? It's not the hand technique. So yeah, that pattern would be 5, 6, 7, 8. And here's an example of that in the groove in the song. Now, another thing worth noting that actually is really good to watch, Jack Stratton from Wolfpack made a video, one of his Holy Trinity videos, where he's talking about famous kind of unheralded tambourine players of the Motown era. That's an incredible video to watch. Tons of really great historical information. It's also hilarious, really well produced, much more well produced than this video. But it's historical as opposed to instructional, and hopefully this is more instructional. Anyway, so that's our first pattern, and that pattern works kind of all the time. You notice like in that tune, the snare drum's hitting on the and a 2, and a 4 more frequently, and so I'm hitting on the and a 1 and a 3 and kind of filling in that groove, so there's this back and forth conversation between the snare and the tambourine. One thing I like to do in that groove is, and this is true actually for all the tambourine patterns I play, I like to combine short phrases and long phrases to make a subtle conversation just in the phrase myself. A lot of times I'll do short, long, and that feels best to me. So what I mean by that is I'll play that short phrase, that short loop twice, and then I'll play a longer loop where I just keep time with straight notes until that accent comes around again. So this kind of thing. 5, 6, 5, 6, 7, 8. In the video, you'll notice that that's really what's going on a lot of the time. So the next pattern that works you know, pretty much all the time, is just to flip that. Have all my accents be on the end of 2 and the end of 4 instead of on the end of 1 and the end of 3. When I do this, it tends to reinforce the groove more as opposed to just being in conversation opposed to it. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So there's an example of that here. What I'm doing on those accents, right? All I'm doing is taking my whole palm, smashing it against the head, just kind of catching the head, right? And those are the big accents. Those are my snare hits, you know, for when I'm playing tambourine. With this motion where I'm always going down, up, down, up, down, up, I can kind of choose which notes to ghost or let which notes come forward or let which notes kind of not exactly hit. And by doing that, I can make the pattern I'm playing kind of more of a bell pattern or more of a syncopated pattern so that I'm not just kind of playing straight notes the whole time. A really simple example of this is frequently in that last pattern, I'll kind of ghost the end of 1. So it sounds more like 1 a 2 ba, 1 a 2 ba, this kind of thing. Right? And I can take that farther and have longer phrases where I ghost more notes and all of a sudden I'm playing a syncopated pattern that maybe fits in the groove in different ways. So say something like 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? So now just with that vocabulary, you can play so many things. You can play short, long phrases where your accents are on this and beat, on this and beat. I can leave out certain 16th notes to make it fit in the groove in more interesting ways or be as upbeat centric as I want. And a lot of this accessory percussion stuff is about being upbeat centric or finding the spaces in the groove to fit into. And then the last thing that I tend to do is to use the roll technique and use it in ways that really accents what you want to accent. So I kind of always attack and release my rolls. You notice right at the beginning of the tune, I play a big roll that comes in on the end of 1, and there's just one big crescendo that stops on the end of 4. And one of the reasons that's effective musically is because I'm making a distinctive attack and a distinctive release. So instead of just going, I'm actually attacking the roll and stopping the roll really hard. And that makes a big event of whatever you're playing. So just with those things, you could play a whole lot of stuff in a song. And maybe what you want to do is accent the backbeat with the snare drum, right? When you're talking about the loudest parts of tunes, maybe what you want to do is reinforce where those big drum parts of the groove fall. So just that pattern I was playing before, it's easy to just put that on 2 and 4 like a backbeat. Like 5, 6, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1. Right? Now it's a backbeat groove. And I think that's a way cooler thing to do in a situation for any dance music where the default might just be to go shaky, shaky, pa, shaky, 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 pa, shaky, shaky. And this is just my bias and my kind of loving all that music from New Orleans and gospel and Motown and funk and all that stuff. It's like whenever there's an opportunity just to play backbeats, it's just so much cooler, right? That's what I think. One thing I really love about this style of tambourine playing is that the visual aspect of it and the physicality of it can make the music a lot more exciting too. You'll notice in the Digdown tune, there are times where I'm just kind of keeping time down here, and then on really loud sections of the tune, I might be way up here. And one thing that's cool about this is instead of just doing this, which you don't have many different dynamics that you can do that, I can choose to either be playing fairly softly here, right? I can choose to play it kind of loud. I can also choose to play it really loud and actually smack the head with kind of every one of those notes, like. And when you get to a big section of a tune, it's really nice to be able to have those different levels, right? And then the other things that I guess I would mention is that It's a tambourine, and there's a certain way that we are kind of conditioned to think tambourine should fit in the groove. But if you see it just as a vehicle or a vessel for making sounds and textures, there's so much you can do with the instrument. You'll notice sometimes I tend to just kind of hang back and keep time and reinforce time really lightly, almost like a really subtle shaker. You know, sometimes it's really nice to lay out completely so that when you come back in, it feels like the groove is really pushed forward. You know, and sometimes you want to really pop out of the texture and make a little statement, you know, and have this conversation happening. A default thing for aux perk in all of these types of situations, the tempos tend to be right to make quarter note triplets feel really exciting. If you really want to just pop out of that groove, play a bunch of quarter note triplets and everyone will look at you. Hopefully they look at you in a way that's like, oh yeah, that was cool, that really added some spice. But you'll see some instances in the track where I play those quarter note triplets, like, right? And you'll notice just in that little bit right there too, there's some subtle things you can do to make it more exciting, like when I attack one of those rolls to crescendo into the end of the roll. That's kind of basic music, micro phrasing, good stuff. But with the tambourine, you can make that crescendo visual as well, which I think is also just one more way to make the music exciting, right? Like if I'm gonna play my first accent of the roll here, and then I'm gonna until it's, you know, up at face level. That just makes a little bit more of a musical statement, which is great. So yeah, lastly, in terms of exploring those different textures, just think of something you might want to hear and the way the tambourine can kind of speak that thing into existence in a way other instruments can't. It can function as a shaker type texture, and it can also function as kind of a second snare drum type texture, or just another drum, which I think is what makes it so cool, and why I think it's kind of woefully overlooked as a groove instrument. So one example would be playing thumb rolls, which is a more classical style tambourine thing. It's kind of hard on the plastic head, but I've always thought it is really nice to use a thumb roll as a crescendo into a backbeat from another instrument, that kind of thing. And I actually used that sound in a track in a Cougar song from years ago that I'll just clip here quickly. But yeah, some other things you can do if you know anything about playing Brazilian instruments, or Pandeiro, the Brazilian kind of tambourine. It's usually a little bigger, the head is looser, kind of more calf, and the jingles are heavier. That technique and that drum is played more drum style than jingle style, and there's a lot of using the actual tone and using your thumb to get higher pitched, or using your back finger to do the same, like high pitch, low pitch stuff. I played capoeira for a long time, and I got really used to playing Pandeiro patterns that were like, right, this kind of classic capoeira stuff. And if you have actual Pandeiro technique, you can use that stuff a lot too. I don't have a ton of Pandeiro technique, but I've got enough to kind of get by here and there. But anyway, it's just a really cool, vibrant instrument that no one gets taught about in this sense. And it is such an essential instrument in gospel music and in New Orleans music, but I think it applies to all dance music where it's just totally underused and can be such an exciting thing. You know, the jingles, if played right, can give you this really dirty hi-hat sound. The smacks can be like this rim shot that has this extra white noise. And you can use it as an instrument that fills in gaps in the groove, kind of like an extra bell pattern or hi-hat pattern. You can use it to reinforce the groove. You can use it to kind of lay a foundation of kind of soft, lovely white noise, the bedrock of the track. And I looked around for instructional videos on this stuff and found none, so decided to do one. So I hope that stuff is helpful, and here's me fake playing a tambourine track over the Mama Digdown, and go get 'em.
1, 2, 3. watching my video in my house, in my room. And make sure liking and subscribe. Make sure you like and subscribe for more. And thank you.